All right, let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Appreciate your attendance. My name is Bob Blake. I'm the practice manager for Sage Intacct at JMT Consulting. And today we're going to talk about managing grants and contracts in Intacct. If you have questions as we go along, there is a Q&A button in the ribbon for Zoom. You can post a question there, and as I up, I'll answer those. Or if you don't see that and you see chat, if you want to send a chat, that we'll see those come up as well. Okay, so I have here a slide presentation, and then we'll also go into product today. The objectives of this session is to show you how to track grants in Intacct, determine the best way for your organization. There's really two methodologies. One is recording grants, and another is getting a little bit deeper and doing grant management. So we'll talk about how you can accomplish both of those within Intacct. And we'll talk about some of the additional functionality that's available. Some of it's included in core, some of it are add-on subscriptions that will help you to streamline grants management. So things like timekeeping and automatic billing and dynamic allocations. We'll get in and talk about what some of those things are for today. And we'll talk about some opportunities that you might find in your process or in your system to enhance grant management within your organization. Okay, so tracking grants in Sage. So tracking a grant in Sage Intacct is done by using a dimension. And if any of you are using Intacct, you know that Intacct is a table-driven chart of accounts, and it's made up of multiple dimensions, and the dimensions that come standard can be renamed and retooled to work for your organization, and you can add additional ones. What you'd want to make sure is that you have a dimension that's dedicated to grants. So it would have the value for each grant that you administer within your org. And that allows you to tag those transactions. You can use any of the standard dimensions to track your grant, but what we're going to talk about today is why you would want to use the project dimension, because it gives us some additional power that we don't have with the other dimensions. Okay, so let's take a look here. So if you look at your project dimension for grants, I'm going to hop into product at the same time. And if I look here at my grant card, what you'll notice is that if I look at this Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant, I can track a lot of things about a grant that if I were to just use, for example, if I were to just come into one of my standard dimensions for department, for example, and tracked a grant here, I would just be putting in a name, a manager, and another status. And I could add in some custom fields, but I don't have a whole lot of stuff to work with there. If I'm using the grant information, then what I'm able to do is I'm able to track a lot more information about a grant. I can track some beginning dates and end dates. If I have grants that are related to one another in some way, I can tag those with a parent. I can set up different statuses for it. So you could even use Intacct to track grants that you have applied for. So you could use this status here, applied for, and tell it that it's inactive. So I can't post anything to it yet because I haven't been awarded that grant, but I still want to track everything that I've applied for. So you could use this for folks in the development office that might want to come in and use Intacct to keep track of grants that they have. And that gets you ahead of the game because you'll have all of the information that you need about that grant once it is approved. You can assign grant managers. We can do business rules. Some business rules around this are with time. So if you're collecting time information, whether you're entering it in through Intacct or whether you are importing it in from somewhere else, you can have the system go out and create some transactions based around that. So we can post provisional fringe rates. We could post other types of things along with that grant as time comes in. Additional information that can get collected here is we can keep track of approved hours, how many hours are remaining against that grant, along with observed percents of completion, additional contacts. How do we want to bill this grant? And are my AP and PO billable against it? And are my employee expenses billable? What's my contract amount? I can default some of my other dimensions so that when I key in a grant code, it'll automatically pop those in for me. Of course, those can be editable, so if you need to change that restriction for whatever reason, you could. Attachments, so I could have my information related to that grant here in the attachment area. So I could have the contract there, any revisions, mods, etc. Here, this is an example of where using some of the additional functionality in Intacct, in this case, custom fields, I can add custom fields to my grant record. And if I need to keep track of CFDA numbers and agencies and things that I need for a CIFA report, I could add those into that grant and be able to report on those. And we'll take a look at a report with those towards the end of today. You can get, with the grant dimension, you have the ability to have basic grants, which gives you these first two tabs really. And then you have the ability to add on grant tracking and billing and resources. And depending on how your grant is set up and how you're able to bill, you might consider using some of that additional grant functionality. And what it allows you to do here is it allows us to track our employees and items that we're billing to this grant. So if we have office supplies or labor or program supplies, et cetera, that need to get billed to them, if we tag those as billable as we go along, then we can tell the system here how to bill. Am I going to bill, this person's going to get billed at cost, this person's going to get billed an hourly rate. Charges that go against it are going to get billed this way, are going to get billed against this line item, and I'm going to bill those at cost as well. I could do cost plus, depends on what your grant allows. So I can assign these resources to the grant. And when we look at tasks in a moment, we'll see that we can actually get down to the task level of where someone can work. If we're looking at a grant summary here, I have a multi-entity environment, so it's showing me all of my companies, and then it's showing me this grant where I have expenditures and costs and revenue. So I can see a nice snapshot of where I'm at with that grant here. These are all totally user definable. So you create the labels that you want here, and you create the account groups that you want to be displayed. So it shows you the information that's relevant to your work. Budget, here I can put in my budget amounts. I could actually then see actual billings and actual costs that happened against the grant. And hours, here are hours that were billed. Here's hours that were posted to the grant but not billed. They may not be billed at all. They may be billed, they may be non-billable hours that were admin that we're eating out of unrestricted funds. Down here I have employee expenses again by that. Let's see here. Very good question. The project dimension is the grant dimension. Thank you for that. I should have said that. It is the same thing. I've just renamed it to grant. So they are synonymous here in that grant and project accounting are the same. Of course, on our grant record, just like we have on vendors or customers or any transaction, we have the ability to collaborate. So we have the ability to send our colleagues some notes here, and that standard functionality across the system. Invoicing options, just asking us what we want to do if the bill is more than our budgeted amount. And I'm going to hop over here to tasks. We can set up tasks. Sometimes a task might be related to pieces of the work plan for that grant or the project deliverables if it's contract based in that way. You might have your tasks there. If I edit a task like I'm going to do now, you'll see that we can set up names. We can talk about when this task begins and ends, whether there's dependencies, and then what item, if we're charging things to this task, what item do we want to bill it against? So when it's billable, where do we want that revenue to go? We want to go to local grant award. That could be different by each task. You'll see additional information is here. If we're doing milestone billing, well, we can track that. If we're putting in priorities and work breakdown structure codes, types of time. This is where we assign the individuals who can charge time to this task here. And then it'll keep track of your plan duration and things like that. Resource scheduling, if you're using the resource piece, that is an additional subscription that you can add to project or grant. And that allows you to go and search resources by different types of skills that they might have or availability, and then assign them to that grant if you'd like to. I have over here, these are two tabs that I've added on. So this was provisional rate information. So here, I'm just asking a question, is it enabled billing for indirect costs? So if later on we'll look at some dynamic allocations, what I might do is group things together in a way that it looks at this to know that it does get that. This I added on just a drop-down box here. So kind of the point is that any of the data that you want, that you need to track about a grant, if it's not here, you can add it. You can either add it into an additional tab like I did here with the CFA is down here on its own area within that tab, or you can create your own tabs. Some clients will have 30, 40 different things that they track and create a tab just for those for grant managers to enter that information. You would use, looking at the question here, the question is we use the project dimension for projects. Can I duplicate that for grants and have them run concurrently, or do I have to set and use the project dimension as it is set up now to overlay grant management? What you would do is set up maybe a different numbering scheme. So if I go back and look at the grants that are here, the pieces that you enable then dictate what you see as you go into edit, whatever you have going across here. So if you have basic, then you have the first two. If you have grant billing and grant tracking and billing, or project billing and tracking, then you get all of them except the ones that were custom made. But what I would do is if you have grants and projects, you'd put them in the same dimension and maybe use a different numbering scheme. So you use P for projects and G for grants. No need to really duplicate them into anything. If you know that they're a grant, then it's a grant rather than a project. Some of the other things that we can do by using parent relationships here is that in some cases, maybe you have sub-awards under a specific grant, so you track those with a different number, or also I track in this instance some non-project grant related, that way they're keyed there, or shared facilities or cost pool for payroll and taxes. That way you've got your ability to allocate at month end out of those cost pools, if that's something that you do for your grants. So a lot of different things that you can track. Here, I'm just going to go through these. As I said before, other dimensions, not so much. You don't have the ability to track so many things as many things as you do in the grant, and it's not billable. So grant recording versus grant management. So grant recording is really just using the system to track the activities that relate to any given grant at a time. So you you have the ability to run a report and see actual data or budgeted data by grant. What you miss from not doing full grant management is that you don't see that full picture of what are the RFPs that have been submitted and awarded and non-awarded. You have the ability to automate labor and overhead allocations. You can do vouchering for reimbursements, manage your indirect costs, and create some funder reports. They will send out the slides to you after the presentation. Let's see. Okay, so recording grants. So if you're using not anything other than project or grant to do that, you can see you get a lot of great other benefits that we talked about by doing full grant management and utilizing the project dimension. All right, so if you're using the project dimension, you'll notice that you have, if you're going to track labor or staff time, then you would be using the project tracking, project costing. If you're wanting to do reimbursable expenses and do the billing, then you would be project costing and billing. And again, project and grant are synonymous here. And if you want to do program staff management, then you need to have the resource management piece. So it is broken up into different pieces so that you can use the pieces that you need. All right. Some of the other things that you can do by using the grant project dimension is you can do revenue management, expense management, and some other management functions like allocations. So billing on allocated methods, if we're using revenue management, there's a subscription for revenue recognition. And what that allows us to do is to create a schedule. Let's see, scheme seems to have skipped a slide, or I removed one accidentally. Here, so we'll skip to the billing part. So you can create custom vouchering templates in Intacct, and you can attempt to mirror what your funder wants to see on an invoice when they get it. A lot of times they'll have their own form that you'd have to populate either on their website or you need to upload it to their website, things like that. In those cases, you get as close as you can to that with your vouchering template so that you have the data and you can easily populate that into their template that you need if it's not 100% reproducible within the custom templates in Intacct. And those are there included in core to be able to do a custom template for an invoice. Revenue recognition. So if you have a contract and that contract spans over time, you may need to recognize the revenue over time, or depending on how that contract was written, you might need to, we won't go into all of those requirements, that's a whole nother webinar. What you might need to do is recognize that revenue on a certain day. So if I have a contract and I need to bill that, but I would want to recognize the revenue over time, then I use revenue recognition. And what I would do is I would create an entry with items, and then I would choose a revenue recognition template. And that revenue recognition template, what it does is it allows us to set up a time period in which to schedule entries to be made from that contract. So in this case, you'll see that we would recognize when it's 100% complete, we would recognize 100%. And we would be putting that into our unbilled sales revenue. So if we look at this here, what can also be done is, so in that other example, we're just doing it all at one time, right? The other way is to spread this out over time. So if this needed to get done by month, then I could just split that up, tell it that I want to use a straight line annual recognition. I want it for a fixed period of time, and I just walk forward through the number of periods, and I can automatically have that post for me. So we'll create a revenue recognition schedule, and recognize the revenue in the periods that it should based on that contract. Okay, so if I were to hop in Intacct to look at that, what you would basically do is if you were to, two ways of really doing billing in Intacct as well, is if I were to come into accounts receivable and I just did an invoice, when I hop down here, you'll see that I could key in where I want things to go to, and then I would choose a revenue recognition template. So in this case, this one that I have for Work Comp 3, that one's just going to post it all the third month of the year, I believe. This one here for monthly, if I go view this, schedule, then what it will do is it's going to go post one day. I'm going to edit that. And it's going to go for 12 months. How does it know what to do? Is it's going to be based on my transaction date. So I actually tell it here when to start and stop my rev rec, okay? So I can do that in a regular invoice. Also, what you'll notice, if you are using grant tracking and billing, when you do an accounts payable bill, you have the ability to mark something as billable to that grant. Then what happens is you're able to run and have the system under grants or projects, you have the ability to generate invoices. And what that does is it goes out and it looks at that grant, it looks at everything that's been posted to it that's been marked as billable, whether that's AP invoices that we just did here, or it may be time and expense that come in through employees, that come through employee, then that will be revenue recognition is not part of the core standard. It is an additional subscription or module. So generating invoices, that would allow you to also put a rev rec schedule on it as well. So you could recognize that revenue over time. Okay, so you do have a couple ways that you can hit the system for billing, or the system can help you to do billing. Some other things are expense management. So employee expenses, there's lots of options there. There is the ability in Intacct to do time and expense and come in and enter in an expense report. I would then be able to mark whether or not this was billable. So if I were to put in an employee expense report, and part of grant billing and costing is the ability to enter in time and expense, that is included in that subscription. You can choose your expense types, which are usually words. So because it's non-accounting folks entering these in, so I'm going to choose my program supplies. I'm going to choose which grants I want to charge this to and mark that it is billable. You can make that default by setting that up on the grant so that it defaults for you, okay? Then this allows us to include this on that invoice when we go to do grant billing. So when this is submitted and approved, then that comes through. This can also be accomplished with third-party expense reporting tools like Nexonia or Concur, Expensify. There's quite a few of them out there on the market. Most of those products, what you would end up doing is having it in the integration to Intacct. We would have it push over into Intacct into an expense report rather than just an AP bill. Most of those products allow you to do an integration in multiple ways. If you were doing grant billing, you'd want to set it up so that it actually hits your expense report here, tagged as billable, so that it will flow through into grant billing. So you do have multiple options when it comes to expense reports, not just the Intacct employee expense reimbursement. Purchasing and procurement. So I looked at on doing an accounts payable bill and entering it in directly there. If you're using purchasing and you're doing a purchase order or a purchase request, you also have the ability within that document to tag something as billable as well. So if you're starting by doing a requisition and changing it to a PO and doing receiving, and from receiving to an invoice, then that will all pop through purchasing and payables to that final invoice for billing. One additional thing that you have here is if you are, for example, we'll use Kale. So if I'm doing $12 and I'm charging it to this grant, if I wanted to be able to show spend insight, that's something that is good for grant management. And I must have forgotten something. Yep, I forgot a date. We need a day in there. Does everybody know if you hit the letter T for as in today in a date field, it'll populate with today's date. Now you can show spend insight, and I must have forgot a dimension, entity and department program. Okay. This is what I teach and I don't do. So I'm going to buy that for entity 100, and I have my budget in by program, grant, and entity. So it's telling me that I need to have at least those keyed in order for it to display a budget for me. So if I am keeping track of grant budgets, then I have the ability to key in a budget. It'll show me my actual and then where I would be at if I were to purchase this. Now I have committed expenditures in there because I have this demo instance set up to encumber or commit funds as purchase orders are created so that I know where I'm at with my spending at all times. So another benefit of having that you could actually accomplish in any dimension. It doesn't have to be in the grant dimension in that case, but you do have the ability to put in your grant budgets and see where you're at against them as you're asking permission to buy things. That same functionality is true in AP under bills. If you have that turned on, you can see spend insight there, or even at the journal entry level. Okay. Then we have dynamic allocations and indirect cost rates, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. So kind of just, I hopped into product rather than just do slideshows, but you can see that you can also do credit card expenses. I didn't mention that. If they're non-reimbursable, your credit card expenses could get put in through here. And that is really a workaround because if anyone uses credit cards, there's not a billable box there. No, you know what? Better make sure I'm not telling a lie there. Let me make sure. That might have been in the past. Nope, it's still a workaround. I don't know why I questioned myself, but okay. So if you wanted to enter in credit cards, you could mark them as non-reimbursable here, and then it will get charged to the grant because you can't charge a grant through a credit card entry. Okay. Here, this is in purchasing, where you'll notice that you had that billable box that I mentioned before. You have your spend management. You have budgeting. So if you are budgeting, you can budget by, again, most people are, you don't really use Intacct to create a budget, right? You use it to enter in your budget from Excel or from third-party source like Vena or Adaptive Insights, etc. Some people will have a fiscal year budget or an operating budget that they just add to every year, and they include their grants with it. Sometimes there's reasons to keep a grant budget separate. In that case, you might just have budget details where you are making sure when you make that entry that you're tagging that grant, right? So you may budget by grant so that you can get budget to actual reporting, and you can also see where you're at with spend as you go through. We talked about the tasks that you have on grants. As of the last release, those tasks are a new dimension, and it doesn't have to take up one of your other dimensions. So as of, a couple weeks ago that release came out, that is new to Intacct. So if we were to look in our configuration, we can set up to have that as a dimension instead of as a standalone dimension instead of taking over classes where it would used to meant to. So we can set that up. The other thing that I wanted to show in here is that we have the ability to, when we're doing time entry, how we want that time entry to be shown. So if I'm looking at grant and task in this case, then when I'm looking at my doing a timesheet, if I'm having folks enter in time here, again, if time is being captured somewhere else, it can be pushed over into here with an API or imported in. And you'll notice that there is a billable flag here. So when I choose a grant, if I choose the Bloomberg grant, I would choose a task that I want to bill, my time type, and then it fills in some of those other dimensions for me, and I put in my hours that I worked on that specific day, right? So again, here I can have that billable checkbox so that the grant can automatically get billed for us. Okay. Platform services, we talked about the ability in platform to add some custom fields. There's some other things that you might do. So spend management, this is telling me that, hey, you're over budget. So when you are doing, when spend management is implemented, if you are setting up transaction definitions, purchase orders, you can choose one of two things. You can tell it, hey, let them know they're over budget, and then let them just hit OK, it's all right. Or you can choose that it does not allow the user to continue with the transaction. So that's helpful. Tasks, again, here's a list of tasks that we looked at a little earlier. Custom fields, here's where an example of things that are in a custom field on the grant record for grant management and grant requirements. You'll see we added in some additional fields there. Platform services, besides being able to enter in your custom fields, you can also use smart rules and events. So in this case, we have a smart rule that's set up that is for a W-9. So in order to enter a bill towards a vendor, you have to have a copy of their W-9 on file. So in our vendor record, we're actually using two things here. We are, we would have had a custom field here that said there was a W-9 on file. And if that box was not checked, then if we put in a bill, it looks at that box and says, whoop, we shouldn't be entering in a bill. Okay, so we're using two things. We're using a custom field and we're using a smart rule in that case. So that's a rule. So smart rules, what those do are they give you warnings while you're doing a transaction. Another smart rule might be, make sure there's an attachment on the grant record. Make sure there's an attachment on the AP record. You can use smart rules for many things to make sure that you have the data that you want within the record. You can also do smart events. So in this case, this sent an email to someone saying, hey, a new GL account was created. So this, upon something being completed, sends out a note to someone is what an event does, or it alters data in some way that you determine. Okay, so here it's saying this is a GL account number has added this, and it was looking to make sure that there was that it was all numbers and not some letters. So it's saying that that is an improper format. Okay, you can expand your functionality using other systems. So a lot of people use Salesforce for grant management or Flux. Those can be used. They're probably probably 100 other grant management tools out there that you could either interface within directly, bi-directionally, or with APIs that might be, like Salesforce is the case that, you know, it's bi-directional and things move in between both systems. Okay, so I'm going to come back to reporting in a moment. I'm going to talk about dynamic allocations now. So within General Ledger, there are transaction allocations. I'll talk about those really quickly because a lot of times folks know how they want to distribute or allocate costs up front. And this is a piece of functionality that exists within core product, and maybe it's just head count. So I come in here, here's my head count, and when I put in, then I can put in my values for head count, and it comes up to 100%, right? So as I put in a bill that comes in maybe for office supplies or for rent, when I use this allocation code in an AP bill, if I were here using AP and I chose some utilities account and I'm using utilities and basing that on head count, what you'll notice is I'm going to put in here, and I'll put in $100, make it easy math. All right, what you'll notice is the rest of my dimensions all grayed out on me because when I hit show details, it's going to show me how it was distributed. So it was distributed based on this allocation table that was here. So that works really well for a lot of organizations because they're able to use the logic here to create allocations and get things allocated to grants. However, a lot of organizations need to take this to another level. And there's a subscription that's called dynamic allocations. And what dynamic allocations allow us to do is to create indirect costs. So we can do releases from restriction. We can allocate based on actuals that have happened in the system during the month. An example might be, you know, I'm going to allocate my payroll taxes and benefits, and I want to, as those bills come in, I'm throwing those into a cost pool. And at month end, I'm looking at what my total payroll hours or dollars were. I have an example of both here. And what will happen is at the end of the month, I'll run this allocation. It'll go look at the hours or dollars that are posted into payroll and into salaries, and it'll take that benefit amount that's in the pool and it will allocate it out based on where the hours and dollars were at. So I couldn't have used a transaction allocation in this case because I didn't know what the value is, and it's because it happened simultaneously. Okay, so I can use dynamic allocations to do that. So let's just take a look at one to kind of give you an idea, and I'm going to go through it really quickly. If we don't already have one out there recorded on that, we can definitely do a webinar on allocations. So in a nutshell, what this allows us to do is determine which dimensions we want to focus on for the allocation. So we want to look at our entity, we want to look at our program, and we want to look at our grant. The other things, not so much. We don't really care about sites and items and employees in this case, maybe. And what I do is I tell it I need to set up a source. So the best way to do that is to create an account group. Same thing that we use for doing reporting, right? So I create an account group that says, these are my payroll taxes and benefits, and they're all in these accounts. And I want to allocate 100% of them out. And I want to empty the pool. So I have posted everything into a shared department and a cost pool for taxes and benefits. So I'm filtering here because it only filters based on what's here. It doesn't, if you put filters in your account group, it doesn't, the word fell out of my head. It doesn't use those. it will use whatever filters are here. So you can filter that. And then you tell it what's my basis. Well, my basis, I'm actually using statistical accounts in this case. And a statistical account for hours can automatically get created as you enter in time against your, in your payroll, not your payroll, in your timesheet. So if you're doing timesheets in Intacct, or you're pushing timesheets in from ADP or the 1,000 other payroll providers, you're getting hours into the system. And they're in a statistical account. So I can use those statistical hours now against my source so that I can create an entry that will hit allocated payroll taxes and benefits, and it will reverse it out of the original accounts that they were in my pool. So I am allowed to also tag different dimensions. So the dimensions that weren't in focus, if I wanted to tag them all to a specific site, I could. That, you know, if that was necessary. So a lot of times, if you're a heavily funded grant organization, people are working on more than one grant at a time, especially those in admin, then you want to have some type of allocation in place in order to allocate their benefits if it's not something that's being done in payroll. And, you know, that may be, you know, setting up pools for all different types of things. So you might be basing overhead allocations based on hours or dollars that were worked within a specific grant. Another thing you can do, if you're here, I have a IDC at 12.35%. So here what I'm doing is I'm creating the indirect cost entry with the allocation module. So I'm coming down here saying, here's all my accounts that are allowed IDC, allocate 12.35% of all those costs. I'm telling it to look at the same exact account group. It's kind of an odd one because we're not, the source and the basis are the same, right? It's just however much is there times 12.3%. So then we're telling it to hit my IDC offset and IDC applied. So again, those are accounts, you call them whatever you want. So this will effectively do a debit and a credit for 12.35% of the amount of dollars that are charged to a specific grant in a group of accounts. Sometimes you got to create several because you'll have a grant that has different allowable costs, right? So you may have to have an account group per grant. Hopefully not, but I have seen folks that need several. Releasing restrictions. So that's another one when we're heavily grant funded and they're all on a reimbursable basis rather than using revenue recognition. Since they're reimbursing you based on what you spent, you're going to release those funds there. So if you're releasing restrictions, we can come in, tell it to go look at all of the expenses is your source. Go look at my expenses that are there. My basis is the same and do a release. And I'm just telling it hit satisfaction of restrictions and contributions. And then here's where a good example of using these dimension overrides comes in, because I'm telling it hit temporarily restricted on my satisfaction side and hit on my contribution side, hit unrestricted. So when I originally booked that, I would have booked that into a contributions account with a temporarily restricted on it. And now I'm moving it between those two columns. So that makes it, gives you that capability to run those. You can group these together, and then when you run them, you generate the allocation. You could come in and do that, or you could do them on a recurring basis. You could even have them run on every night if you wanted to. So if you wanted to calculate IDC and calculate releases from restriction every night, you could. Okay, so that's where we can use dynamic allocations to help us with our grant reporting. with our grant management. And now reporting, grant reporting, we know it's something that you need on a consistent, regular basis. Most funders, are going to require you to report back. I haven't had anybody tell me people just give them money and don't want to report. That would be really nice. Many times they have a lot of different restrictions on them that you need to be able to track in the system. So, if you're doing that IDC and the indirect cost needs to be different because the requirements are different, you can. And you, generally speaking, need to get reports done on a regular, consistent basis. So what we're going to do is walk through some reports and talk about how you can use reporting to do that, help with that. So I'm going to pop down to the end here to kind of go over these slides. Just for time's sake, I'm not going to hop in products for reporting. You do have the ability, if you need to filter down into a dimension, you can always create dimension groups and dimension structures. Sometimes you create those because you may be grouping some grants together if you were doing them in the example that I showed with having tasks being rolled up into those. So you might want to use those to do that. When you are using dimensions in a report, when you're looking at a report here, I'm going to just open up one, expenditures versus actual and commitments. Here, you'll notice you can always create a report by account or by dimension. And when you're looking at your rows, you can always tell it that you want to expand by a dimension. And that's where if I wanted to see professional fees and I wanted to see all of them by grant listed underneath them instead of just seeing professional fees, then I can change that and see them by grant. So if I look at a report now, you'll notice if I look at professional fees, I have grant 402 and then non-program related. So I can see those that way. So I can see them going in rows that way. I can see them on columns. I'm going to hop back over here. I'm going to make that a summary again, or detail, show accounts rather. No, I don't. I want summary. But I don't want to expand by dimension. And then columns. So when we looked at this report a minute ago, it was just my organization-wide what that report looked like. If I want to expand by a dimension, if I look in my actual column, then I would come over here and I could tell it to expand by my grant. And I'm going to set that and run my report. And what you'll notice is that I have my grants going across. What you may or may not notice is that it doesn't show all of my grants, it's showing all of my parents, right? So if I wanted it to show me the children along with that, I would tell it to show individual balances so that I get the subs. So here I had the Middle East Partnership Initiative, and I'm seeing subgrant 401 and 402. So I see all of the pieces, okay? So using rows or columns, you can expand the dimensions that you want to either show across the row or I'm sorry, down the row or across the column. All right. So here you'll see each funding source like I mentioned there. You can, on your filters tab there, you can have it prompt you for which grant you would like to see in a report. So if you create a report that you like and you want to run it for a specific grant at a time, then it can prompt the user for which grant they want to see. Sometimes you hard code it in because the audience for that report, you don't want them to get a prompt for it, right? So in your permissions, you might set who it's for and you might set their grant for them here. Using variance highlighting. So what you'll notice here, maybe, let's see, yep, here we go. We're seeing this is my remaining budget. So this is red because it's showing me that I'm over budget based on the formula that I have set forth within my column. So I did some math where I was actually taking my commitment set of books and I'm taking my actuals and commitments to come up with the remaining budget if I were to spend everything that's on an open PO along with everything that's been recorded. And I've told it in my remaining budget to give me some conditional highlighting, and I've added in some rules. So it's less than 0, make it green. If it's greater than 0, make it red. And I can use multiple colors, so you can pick which colors you want. Okay, so that allows you to do some conditional highlighting that brings it out to a grant manager's eyes that we're over budget. We need to drill down and see what's going on. All right, just some examples of that. Then I'm going to hop back up to before those slides. So best practices are to use the project dimension or grant. Naming conventions, make sure that those naming conventions are good. You saw how I had some that were task-oriented and some that were not. The more that you put into it, the more that you're going to get out of it. You can incorporate these other components later. So if you've been doing your allocations in Excel and you're ready to take that next step, you can add those into Excel. Can also add time and expense and whether or not you're doing the billing through the system at different times. So to make things easier, using custom fields, smart rules, and smart events to enforce rules that you want to have around the system. Have your grant IDs be auto-generated numbers. It's just easier. You don't have to think about it, especially if you're going to track grants that you have not gotten yet. Collaborate probably is more powerful here than anywhere else because this is a place where you can ask questions on that grant and have your employees involved in that. We didn't talk about dimension relationships, but these can be pretty powerful here as well. So if you don't know what a dimension relationship is, it's where we can actually set up a relationship between grant and restriction, or grant and task, or grant and vendor, or any dimensions that you have, so that if a particular grant is chosen, you can have a limited list of departments that it can be charged against. So if you have a list of 25 departments, but that grant can only go against 2 of them, you can create a relationship between the 2 so that when an end user chooses a grant, it only allows you to choose that which you should use based on your relationships. You can upload all the document backup that you need to that grant record as well in your attachments. So any questions? Does anybody have questions to ask? If you want to chat those in or put those in the Q&A. And I'm going to hop into, while I wait for any questions to come up, I'm going to hop into how you can actually use the custom fields on a report. And I'm going to use an example of the CIFA details report. So you might remember towards the beginning when I showed that grant card that I had CIFA set up with a bunch of custom fields there. So they're not really good unless we can report on them, right? So if you want, you can always add columns in and tell it what your column type is. You can tell it that it is any of the dimensions that are out there, a dimension attribute. And I want an attribute from my grant record, my grant card, and I want the agency. I want the funded program name. So when I go run this report, it is going to show up and show me, here's my subgrant 1 with agency, and then the amounts that I have in those other columns. So you have the ability to use this information in reporting, which is why you would want that. Good question. So Someone's asked, how do you handle retroactive allocations? For example, say you are 8 months into the year and you get a grant award that requires you to charge salaries retroactively to month 1. That is the million-dollar question. There is not a real easy way to do that. Most people are ending up having to do that in Excel. I haven't come up with a way to be able to do that with a dynamic allocation. Kind of just spitballing this at the moment. What maybe could be done is take this, is reverse the allocations that had been done and then enter in time. I don't know where you get, here's where I have the problem with that is, where are you getting the time from that someone spent on a grant that hadn't been approved? Had that been recorded during that time somewhere that it can be uploaded so that we could reverse the allocation that's there and do a new one? There's a lot of questions around that I would have to be able to come up with the best answer. But short of that, just to show you in an allocation definition, one of the things that you can do is if you were doing let's say that things were just posted to the wrong period or things got posted after you had ran your allocation, you can do activity deltas so that it looks at those deltas to calculate your allocation. So it's kind of truing it up as you go along. And you can also auto reverse your prior posting, and that way it'll use the data. And in that case, you wouldn't want to use a month. You don't want to use a whole year, right? They're your current year to date in that case. And then you would tell it to auto reverse the prior one, and then it would do your allocation based on that. So your source might not be a problem. It may be the basis of where you got those hours from. So without more details, I don't have a definitive answer on that, but it's one of those tricky questions that always comes up. Or, you ran out of money on a grant and people worked on, what do? You have to either reallocate that to somewhere else, but did they really work on that one, or is it unrestricted money, et cetera? We've come to the top of our time, so we have like a minute left if there's another question. Otherwise, I appreciate everyone hanging out with me today and appreciate all the questions. And should you have any more, you can reach out to us, and we will be sending you out a link to the recorded webinar and the slides shortly.
Great, thank you, Bob. And with that, we'll just let everyone go, and thank you for tuning in. We hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.